Hello and welcome to The Content Bite, a podcast for freelancers who use their words to make money. I'm Rachel Smith, a freelance journalist, copywriter, and content producer. I'm also the founder of Rachel's List, a jobs board and community for Aussie writers and other creatives.
Hello, and I'm Lynn Testoni. I'm a journalist and a content writer as well, and Rachel and I are your weekly co-hosts, and every week we're bringing you all kinds of tips, ideas, and some fabulous guests to help you make the most of your freelance business.
Hello, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. Great to be back here. Well, it might not be morning if you're listening to it at night, but it's great to be back here. We're recording in the morning, our podcast with another amazing guest this week, aren't we, Lynn? Just adding to all the crackers we've already had this year.
Yes, so good. We've had so many interesting and varied guests this year already. And I think we both learn as much, if not more, than our listeners every week.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this week is exactly the same. We have UX copywriter Susan Reoch as our guest. Why don't you do the intro?
I will. I would love to. I am so thrilled. We've just been chatting to Susan off air and I'm just so pumped for this chat. She's just a powerhouse. I'm just going to read a little bit about Susan so we can get to know her. Susan Reoch is a UX copywriting expert who's written razor-sharp web copy for everyone from local bookkeepers to booking.com. She teaches other copywriters how to get ahead with UX in her weekly newsletter and inside her group coaching program, UX to Profit. So welcome, Susan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you join us.
It is. It's so great. I know that you call yourself a UX copywriter, and some of us have kind of touched on UX. We've heard about it. Some people are just like, what the hell is that? So let's start by, hearing a bit about you, how you got into it, your background, and how you've grown your freelance business to the level you're at.
Yeah, for sure. So I got started in UX writing a long time ago now. I think about 10 years ago at booking.com, which was amazing. And that was in Amsterdam, which was very exciting. And so I was working there, I think, for about 3 years. And, what that role basically entailed was tinkering with bits of copy and running A/B tests and, that kind of stuff. And then when I came back to Australia, I looked for, so I hadn't actually been called a UX writer there. My title was something like e-commerce copywriter, I think, because the field was still developing. And so when I came back to Australia, I looked for a copywriting job, and all the copywriting jobs I saw were very, very different to what I'd been doing. So I sort of moved into a more traditional copywriting job at an agency. And that was very much focused on SEO and content and stuff like that. So a lot of people actually start in copywriting and move to UX writing now, but I sort of did the reverse.
Yeah.
And then when I started up my own business, we'll probably go a bit more into this a bit later. When I started my own business, I was doing a bit of both. And I had a bit of an identity crisis at the start because I didn't know which to really, everyone's like, you've got a niche. And I didn't know where to niche because I was like, but I love them both. And I think that there's a lot of value in combining them. And I think that day, long story short, I think that day is here. I think that there is a really sweet spot where you can do both now.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Well, talk us through, what is UX? What is user experience? What does it mean to be a UX copywriter?
Yeah, for sure. So UX stands for user experience. And I guess at the surface level, it's about making digital products like apps or, a functional, like maybe an e-commerce website, easy to use. So I'm sure like a great way to think about it is whenever you experience friction when you're trying to achieve something on the internet, that's bad UX. So it's often easier to notice the stuff when it goes wrong than when it goes right.
Yeah, it should be seamless if it's right, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly the word that I use. The practice of UX is really about making any process on the internet as seamless as possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. So what do you love about working in the UX field? What are the challenges?
Great question. I guess the challenges are what I love. So the challenge of getting a really specific set of parameters, like you might have, sort of technical limitations or resource limitations or space, real estate limitations, amount of characters, amount of words, and then finding like a solution that sort of fits them all is a real highlight. I love that sort of like nerdy word challenge part of the job. But I think a bit of a different challenge is that it's still a developing field. So there's a lot of education to be done on the importance of words in product development. And that's feedback that I get from a lot of UX writers that I'm in touch with as well. Like they're going into a corporation and they really have to advocate for the words part of it, and for the words not to just be seen as something that you do at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you think people start with the technology first and that sort of building and the framework without thinking about how the words will facilitate the guiding through the steps into the user experience?
Yeah. No one can see me nodding furiously on the podcast, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think traditionally that's definitely, it started with the tech and the development, and then they were like, oh, actually none of this looks really great, or suddenly there's yellow writing on a white background, like let's get designers involved. And then the words, when people started getting things like error 654327 contact support, and they were like, oh, maybe there's a better way to say that. We should get words involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh. Well, we had I don't know if you know Laura Luck, a UX writer based in Tasmania. She wrote a kind of guide. We have a blog series on Rachel's List called So You Think You Can, and she wrote the So You Think You Can Be a UX Writer. And that was fascinating. It really opened up my eyes to UX and how it is this sort of emerging, kind of fascinating area. But it feels like it still is that really emerging, niche. Do you think it's still in that infancy stage?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of Laura Luck. I was a guest on her podcast, A Table at the Back, in 2019, which was pre-COVID, wow. Which blows my mind.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an emerging niche for copywriters. I think one of the things that I love about UX writers is hearing their backstories. So there's a lot of copywriters and journalists, but also teachers, lecturers, designers, archaeologists, anthropologists. And what I find, really varied background. What I find really interesting, and what is kind of my hot take on the industry, I guess, is how determined people are that copywriting and UX writing are completely separate. Because what a lot of people will say is copywriting is all about selling a product, and UX writing is all about making that product easy to use. Which makes sense. This concept has always jarred with me. And it was only through starting my own business that I've sort of found this sweet spot between the two disciplines.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, UX writing in a sense is kind of trying to push someone in a certain direction, which copywriting does as well. Like you're trying to convert someone or put them in a funnel or, get them to the shopping cart or whatever you're trying to do with that user, I suppose.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't think, like with UX writing, I think the resistance people have to that is that you're not trying to persuade someone to go a certain route, but rather you're sort of like facilitating the route that they want to take. And that's maybe where that sort of tension, I guess, comes into it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lindy Alexander, who we all love, and she's the person who introduced you to us. So thank you, Lindy, if you're listening. She says it's a whole new type of copywriting, and she thinks it's really set to explode. Is that something you've seen as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely want to shout out to Lindy, who's such an inspiration. Yeah, but like I sort of touched on before, the first few years of my career, I was what you'd define as a UX writer. And then I moved back to Australia and did the more SEO conversion copywriting. So what I started to notice was that my UX knowledge made writing web copy so much easier and faster. Yeah. And so I was sort of mixing the best of both worlds without formally having a process around that. But what I always saw was that a website, even if it's a conversion focused or marketing website, is a digital product. So if you're just writing a page in isolation, you can end up with a jarring experience, even if you're a super talented copywriter. And then I started winning contracts for bigger and more complex websites, because I understood how it all fit together and the user flows that were needed sort of within those bigger sites. And basically, if you're a copywriter who writes web copy, at least, well, I would say if you're a copywriter who writes almost any copy, you're creating a user experience. Someone is in an experience when they read your copy. So whether that's for good or bad. So you sort of, it's a bit like SEO, I think, in that way. Yeah. If you ignore it, it doesn't mean that, that you're not in Google or you're not in that world, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Listening to you, it makes me think, that, UX is no longer optional for businesses. It's really something that business owners who might be listening as well need to think about and get on board with, along with thinking about SEO, along with thinking about, all those other facets that go into their web copy. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of work that's out there. I mean, I read in one of your newsletters, you were saying there's so much work at the table. I can put my feet up and just swivel my chair. And, it's just, I can't remember the exact phrase you used, but I thought, wow, cool, So talk us through the kind of jobs and gigs that are out there and whether there is a lot of work to go around.
Yeah, well, I think there's as much work as there are websites, and that's,
infinite almost.
I don't know how many websites there are out there, but it's a lot. And I think that, again, this is where it's really important to look at that difference between UX writing and what I call UX copywriting, because I guess it's about adding the UX part to the copywriting part. And that's where I've found this sweet spot, as I say, because there's, every website, whether it's one of those, 150 plus monster websites, or whether it's just 5 pages, can benefit from a better user experience.
Wow. So do you think this is just a skill you can add to your bow, like SEO or email marketing as a writer or a journalist? Or do you think that most UX writers tend to specialize only in UX?
I've said it before, I'll say it again. You two ask the best questions.
Thank you.
Those nice. Journalistic skills.
Warm fuzzies.
So my answer is both. I think if you're a copywriter who writes websites, or if you have your own, if you're a content writer who has their own website, learning about UX best practices helps so much. And I actually have a group coaching program, UX to Profit. And most of the people in there are copywriters. And what they tell me is it removes a level of subjectivity about what to put on a page, or what to include on the website, or what to leave out. And even if you're a content writer, understanding things like reading patterns and the way people use the internet will help you format even your content so that it's easier to read. And also thinking about where that piece of content fits, like what is someone trying to achieve? Where are they going next? All that kind of stuff. So I do think it definitely has an application for anyone who writes words on the internet, essentially. But UX writing specifically is a different thing. So then that's about being embedded in a product team with designers and developers and working on improving features and functions of digital product. But even then, when I was doing that work specifically, and I know from the people that I talk to in that field, like you're also getting, as the words person, you will also be called on to write app descriptions or landing pages, subject lines, things like that. So yeah, I think having both skills will definitely stand you in good stead.
I want to jump in and just go off script a little bit, because I want to ask you about UX best practice and whether that changes. We see SEO changes from time to time with the Google algorithm. Do you find the same thing happens with, UX best practice?
Yeah, so interesting question. I think, yes, I think there are some changes as we, the people, anyone in the world, get more familiar with using the internet. There is definitely more shortcuts, I think, that can be acceptable because people become accustomed to a certain way of using something. So there's less explanation on how to do it because it becomes more intuitive. So I think that that's a way that it can change, and just, sort of keeping your ear to the ground about that kind of things. But what I really love about UX, and the way that I've come to sort of interpret it or understand it, is that there are sort of principles, I guess, of what constitutes good UX. But what's as important as that is sort of a process. And that's around design thinking, which is about, getting to know your user, defining the problem that they're having.
Do you think you look at analytics a little bit to see, if everybody's getting to the cart but not checking out, or if it's everybody gets the home page but not gets onto the product page? Do you look at that sort of stuff as you're defining the copy?
Oh, 100%. So it's all about, sort of problem solving.
Yeah.
I guess. So you can have all the best practice principles, but you need to look at that within a larger context. And even though something is, I guess what I was saying very roundabout way is, even though something might be, a best practice principle, you still need to test that it works within your context. So it's almost scientific, where you come up with a hypothesis, you test it, you see if it works, you learn, you move from there.
This reminds me so much of, the psychology of getting someone to follow a journey. And I know you mentioned you did Kirsty Fanton's Brain Camp, which is all about that, isn't it? It's learning the psychology of a user.
Oh man, that course is really amazing. And I think that a lot of, I can only speak for myself, but definitely like human behavior and what motivates people to make decisions is definitely part of it and definitely relevant to the practice.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, you've probably worked with so many interesting brands or companies. Talk us through some of the most sort of interesting jobs or gigs you've worked on and what they involved.
Yeah, for sure. I do often sign NDAs. So without giving away a client.
Yeah.
We all do that. We get it.
I guess one of my favorites was a really, really big website, over 100 pages, and coming in at a really strategic, almost consulting perspective. So looking at something called the information architecture, or the structure of the website and the navigation, and then, making sure that was rigorous, and then helping build things called content models for different parts or different types of pages, and doing like lots of trainings with the client. Because, when you're working on these big jobs, you will be working with, content teams and a product owner or a scrum master, like working with designers and developers and stuff like that. So I love it when I get really big projects that can take longer than 6 months, and you almost like you feel so invested by the end of that time, and everyone so well, and they go on to be, friends. And
I even hearing you talk about that, I think, how do you visualize that? Like, how do you even go into a job that's 100-page website and visualize that? All I can think of is, getting a blank wall and sticking Post-it notes up and moving them around.
Like, that's exactly what you do.
Yeah, right. Okay.
That's exactly what you do. So it's all become digitized now, pretty much. But back in the day, you'd have a whiteboard with, there are all different mapping tools and processes that you use, but a lot of them involve whiteboards and sticky notes and mapping it all out, and sort of starting really big picture and getting, more and more concrete as you go along.
Wow. So interesting.
So I guess it's a real specialist skill, UX writing. And what sort of things do they charge? Do UX writers charge? Is it a project rate? I mean, obviously it'd have to be like with a 6-month project with 100 websites, that's quite a complex thing. How do you charge on that? It's an hourly rate.
So I find it's hard. It's a hard question to answer. I think a lot of there are freelance UX writers, and I do some freelance straight up UX writing, or I can, but because I'm in this interesting intersection of UX and copywriting, I think my rates are quite premium. So for a VIP day that I offer, and that's a smaller project, that's when, someone has 3 pages of web copy, say, that they want written or something like that, I charge $2,000. My daily rate when I work on bigger projects is lower because it's a retainer sort of situation. And the trade-off is with those projects that take a long time, like I know I'm getting reoccurring income. So I can only speak for myself. And I think my rates probably align a little bit more with freelance copywriters, because the sort of the end result generally that I'm working on is copywriting.
That's interesting. I know that I've seen what Kirsty Fanton charges. She does a similar thing to you with the VIP day. I think she has a buy a day of my time, and then she's the client's person for that whole 8 hours or something, and charges a similar amount. Do you find that package that you offer is something that's really interesting to clients, or is that like more rare for you to get selling one of those packages?
Good question. No, I think people like it. They can book me in for the day, and at the end of the day, they get the deliverable. If you're doing a larger project, or if I'm doing an end-to-end project, that's weeks before you get to the end. So it's not, I guess, yeah, I think people really, and I see more and more people offering that as well. So I like how contained my time is from having my own business perspective. And I really find like having some of these bigger projects sort of humming along in the background is fantastic. And then doing these short, intensive sessions as well. I like the energy of that. And yeah, I think that they are like, people definitely see the benefit in that.
Yeah, amazing. All right, well, let's get back into that nitty gritty just for a second about costing a UX project, especially one with lots of moving parts. Where do you even start with that?
Yeah, so I tend not to say, okay, so 100 plus web pages is going to cost X.
Yeah.
Oh, it'd be so hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I do know that I do things differently to a lot of copywriters because, you know, there is also just sort of a common theory that you should charge per project or cost per project.
Project based or even value based, which is closer to what you do, because what you do improving would be measurable in terms of experience and in terms of like outcomes like sales and things, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't really, I mean, there's so many variables in something like that too. So I do tend to shy away from that as well. And in those bigger projects too, I'm working with developers, designers, content teams. Like I'm not doing it in isolation. Yeah. But the thing is, with a bigger job like that, a lot of the complex work figuring out the UX doesn't really have actually a deliverable. So sort of once you've mapped out the flow, I find the writing to be really, really easy. That's the words bit that comes at the end is the easy part of it. And a lot of when you're doing a big project like that, there's also a lot of value in, you know, getting stakeholders aligned. Like I said, like they may not have, you know, worked with a UX copywriter before, you know, developing a good relationship of trust within the teams, a lot of meetings at the start. And that's why I work on retainers. So, you know, I'll be with you for the duration of the project, you know, and they'll generally have an idea of when they want to go live. So we'll have an idea of how many months that might be. And then, you know, I'll work with you 1 day a week, 2 days a week, and, you know, come to your stand-up meetings, sort of be involved. Another benefit of that I find for the client is that they don't have to come back to me every time the scope changes and renegotiate a contract. Like, oh, we've suddenly figured out that, you know, we need a whole other section, 10 more pages. How much is that going to cost? Do you have time? You know, it's much more sort of dynamic, and you can just, you don't waste your time with all the admin.
That's a really great point. So your retainer would just keep going. You know, if the project blew out a little bit, you would just keep on going until the end.
Yeah. And they can, I'm like all about, like, you cannot run a project without like just constant communication. So I will flag to them, like, you know, we're running, you know, this is the deadline. These are all the things left to do. I think I'm best utilized doing this, this, and this. Do you agree? Or like, do you want to push the deadline out? So just sort of renegotiating as you go on those bigger projects.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I think we have something we haven't really talked to you about, but I know is a part of UX is microcopy. Can you explain that to us and where it fits into the big UX picture?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, how great that this didn't come up till now, because I feel like, again, another common myth that I'm busting is like UX writing isn't just microcopy. It's much more strategic than that. But that said, those little tiny bits of copy, like the error message example that I used at the beginning, are so essential to you know, to helping. They're like little signposts that help someone figure out where to go next. And so that is definitely a skill in and of itself, for sure. And that's probably one of my favorite parts of the job. I absolutely love it.
It seems to me that with these projects and the way you work, there's so much teamwork involved. So how does that work? That must be challenging. You've probably got whole different personalities. You've got the client and maybe the project owner, as well as like designers and software architects. So how does that work? How do you get a team working?
Are you remote or are you in-house, or?
It can really vary. So when we're talking again about these bigger projects, I like to be considered as part of the team. So, I mean, obviously we're dealing with, you know, we're in a technical age now because of COVID. So that means, you know, jumping in Zoom meetings all the time, being on their Slack groups. So I hear things pop up, or Teams or whatever, you know, whatever communication tool people use. Before pre-COVID, I would go into if it was Sydney based, go into the office and, get to know everyone and have coffees with people. And the most important thing is to get people seeing the value as quickly as possible. So they help you do the things that you want to do.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I actually have a whole guide or mini course on this very topic, actually, the UX Writers Guide. And that's specifically for UX writers who are going into a team setting.
Okay, great. We'll definitely mention that in our show notes for people who want to go and download that. A lot of our audience are journalists, and they are journalists who might have started on magazines or newspapers and are now moving into the copywriting world or the content world. I mean, what would be, your advice for people like that about niching into UX? Is that going to be a massive learning curve for someone who's been in print their whole life, I suppose?
No, and I think we've got a great case study about why now, because the questions that you can ask and having that sort of research focus and that curiosity, I think that's going to stand you in such good stead. I mean, I'm generalizing here, but I feel like that's, I don't know, you two tell me, is that a fair?
Yeah, you kind of have to, get to the nitty gritty of things and be a problem solver for sure. Yeah,
exactly. But I think my advice would be learn the copywriting basics first, formulas, headlines, structuring a compelling argument, those kind of things, the stuff that you write on a single page, essentially, and then take a step back and learn about UX and how what you're writing fits into the bigger picture. But I do think if your plan is to write website copy, I do think UX really is becoming a non-negotiable skill.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Oh, fair enough. So we ask pretty well everyone who comes on the podcast about the tools that they'd be lost without. And now you mentioned some sort of tracking and mapping tools, which might be interesting. And what are the sort of things that you use?
Everyone's horrified when I say this because Excel.
Excel is great.
We love Excel.
Yeah.
Okay. I think two really important parts of being a UX copywriter is being organized and, like I said, being able to communicate complex content to multiple people. And I find Excel spreadsheets a fantastic way of doing that. Yeah. And I've developed some pretty sophisticated, I think, documents to do that. But yes, if you're going to you'll probably also be working with teams in wireframing tools. And that's like Figma, InVision, some mapping tools, Whimsical and Miro, and like I've mentioned already, Slack or Teams for the communication, and Zoom, because that communication part is definitely a big bit of it. And of course, whiteboard and Post-it notes.
Okay.
Oh, that's good to know.
And I know that we were talking offline about, you've done a lot of sort of investment in your business. Can you perhaps, I suppose they're tools in themselves, but can you talk us through some of the ways that you've invested to grow your business and those courses and things that you found invaluable?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I started my business, I thought I can do this on my own. I've got 8 years of experience working as a UX writer and a copywriter. I'm sorted. And then I just, I invested in Brain Camp because I just thought it was so relevant to the work that I do. And I felt like, okay, great. Here's someone, I'm pretty sure Kirsty used to be a clinical psychologist. Yep. Here's someone who can give me really in-depth insight into how the brain works. Great. And what I did, that program was fantastic. And what I loved about it was the connections that I made. And that in and of itself has just been invaluable. So now whenever I invest in programs or business things, I always look for that community aspect and, direct contact with the expert that's running them. And that's just been my own personal experience. But yeah, at the moment, I'm also a member in something called Shrimp Club, which is a mastermind run by Laura Belgray, who is just amazing. So I guess I look at people that I admire and things that they've achieved in their business. And I really wanted to focus on growing my business this year. So I had that goal. So I'm like, this looks like the perfect thing to help me get there. And it has been amazing.
Wow. Okay. So is there anything else that we haven't asked you about UX that's important to know about? And, if you want to upskill in UX? What are your options?
Okay, yeah, I think you've asked such great questions, but I guess if someone was looking to upskill, well, first of all, I've mentioned that I've got a group coaching program called UX to Profit. Probably by the time this goes to air, this round will be closed, but I will probably open it again in the second half of the year. But I think, there are great podcasts out there. Content Rookie is one that springs to mind. That's a great podcast to listen to. And there's a website called, I think it's just nng.com, but maybe we can pop it in the show notes. Nielsen Norman Group, it's run by, and that is just a huge repository of all things UX and very, very research heavy. So yeah, it's a great website.
Fantastic.
So where can people find out about you and find out more about what you do?
Sure, they can head to Susan Reoch copywriter.com. That's my website, but they can also come and say hi to me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I love connecting with other people interested in learning more about UX, and my name is very unique, so if you Google Reoch, you will find me.
It's nice to have a unique name.
Yes, although you've always got to spell it, don't you? That's the problem I don't have with Smith. And if I'd taken my married name, I wouldn't have had it either, because that's Murphy.
There you go.
Yeah. But Susan, thank you so much. This has just been a fascinating chat, and I think it will be just so useful for people out there who want to know more about UX, or even are thinking, that sounds awesome and I'm going to sort of head in that direction, career-wise. So really, really appreciate you sharing so much information with us, and what UX actually involves. Yeah.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Susan, for being our guest this week. It was wonderful. My mind is still buzzing, and I've written down lots of notes of good websites. So that's good. So we can put in the show notes and everything. So I really appreciate it. And that brings us to the end of the show this week. But thanks to everyone who's listening and sharing on social media. And if you like the show, don't forget to leave a rating. We got a really nice rating and review last week, Rach. I don't know if you've seen it. We did.
I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah. So have a look wherever you find your podcasts.
Okay, don't forget, we'll put all the show notes in the iTunes podcast app. So head there to find out more about where you can connect with Susan, and also a lot of the other stuff that we've mentioned on the podcast today. We'll put Laura Luck's blog post in there, and we'll mention a lot of the tools that Susan has mentioned and the courses that she's done, and Content Rookie, and heaps of other cool stuff. So definitely check out the iTunes podcast app if you just want a quick rundown of what we've discussed. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
For sure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.